Okay.
Try láti ṣe sí live streaming so that àwọn tí ò bá àwọn tó bá àwọn tí ò bá ráyè láti lọ máa wo YouTube wọ́n lè lọ máa ṣe YouTube.
Okay. Ẹ ṣé gan, mo dúpẹ́. Ṣé bá ṣe máa ṣe every time rèé?
Àwọn tó bá má
Wọ́n ṣe bá
ẹ ẹ lè bẹ̀rẹ̀ báyẹn ẹ lè share slide yìí wọ́n ti wọlé lẹ́ẹ̀kọ̀ọ̀kan.
okay. Mo tẹ̀ fẹ́ kọ́kọ́ bá wọn sọ̀rọ̀ náà.
Okay.
This is my first class. Mo fẹ́ bá wọn sọ̀rọ̀ kí n tó bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí ní share slide.
Share slide wọ́n ti wọlé lẹ́ẹ̀kọ̀ọ̀kan.
Okay. Mo tẹ̀ fẹ́ kọ́kọ́ bá wọn sọ̀rọ̀ náà.
Okay.
This is my first class. Mo fẹ́ bá wọn sọ̀rọ̀ kí n tó bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí ní share slide.
Share slide wọ́n ti wọlé lẹ́ẹ̀kọ̀ọ̀kan.
Okay. Mo tẹ̀ fẹ́ kọ́kọ́ bá wọn sọ̀rọ̀ náà. Okay. This is my first class. Mo fẹ́ bá wọn sọ̀rọ̀ kí n tó bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí ní share slide. Why is it we echoing?
Is the YouTube.
Oh. Dr. Yelami.
You can start now.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful. Ṣé bá ṣe máa ṣe every time rèé?
Yes, ma.
Okay. Iṣẹ́ la máa fún yín ṣe yẹn o.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. So ẹ máa admit wọn bẹ́ẹ̀ yẹn àbí?
They are there already.
Okay, fine. Thank you, sir. I'm very
Sure.
grateful. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I just need okay, yes. I just want to confirm that
Good
you can
morning, ma.
actually yes, that you can actually hear me.
Morning, ma.
Yes.
Good morning,
How
ma.
are you? Yes, how are you?
Good morning, ma.
And
Good morning, ma.
compliments of the season to each and every one of you.
Same to you.
Yes,
ma.
good morning.
You,
ma.
ma.
Thank you, ma. Same to you,
We
ma.
wish you happy new year.
Okay, thank you for wishing me that. And I'm very sure we're going to have an interesting time. Professor Jide, I taught you earlier on last year, and I'm coming on board. And after me, Dr. Baluga will take over. I am Dr. Ibn Jobi. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Economics. And I'm going to be taking you this morning on economic thoughts. Now, I want there to be decorum in this class because there's so many of us. And because of that, I'm going to ask that you all mute yourself. I think we should know that by now. Please, everybody should mute themselves. The Zoom link was not generated by me. Okay, so I'm going to mute everybody. I think that's what I should do. And any other person who unmutes himself, I'm just going to send out of the class. Because when you unmute and you talk when you're not expected to talk, it disrupts the class. And I wouldn't want that to happen. So please ensure that you're muted. And the medium for communication is through the chat box. You would communicate with me through the chat box. I'll be able to read whatever it is you write. And peradventure, I ask a question. Use the chat box. On no occasion must you unmute yourself unless I give you permission to do such. So having established that, let's start today's topic. Today's topic is economic thoughts. That's what we're going to look at today. Economic thoughts. And essentially, what we'll be doing is that we want to look at the ideology. Okay, I'm coming. Let me record this. So what we want to look at this morning is the thinkings, the thoughts, the writings of economists over the years. And in economic parlance, we refer to them as schools of thoughts. So we have different schools of thought across the years in terms of how people had viewed some concepts in economics, what their thoughts are, what their ideology is all about, what their thinkings are. And that's essentially what we're trying to do here this morning. And we're going to group them under 4 major headings. We're not going to look at everything because you're still in 100 level, but you just need to have a grasp of the thinkings of the forefathers of economics. So we're going to group them into 4 major headings, which is the classicalists, the neoclassicalists, the utilitarianisms, and the welfareists. So we have 4 groups: classical, neoclassical, utilitarianism, and welfare economics. Now, each of these reflects the challenges that were being faced at that point in time. And as a result of the challenges that, of course, you know that economics is there to solve economic problems. So as a result of the different challenges that were faced during their own time period, you know, they came up with thoughts, thinkings, ideology that reflects the changing social, political, and industrial concepts. And that's why we have this school of thought. As we go along, I'm going to ask you to interact as well, because all that we're going to talk about are things that you would have had, at least for most of them, in one way or the other. Probably not for all of them, but for most of them, they are economists that you have come across at one point in time. Because I'm going to assume that most of you in this class, in fact, all of you should have passed economics to be in this class, except for very few departments. So let's move on. We will start with classical economics. Now, this group of people are referred to as the classics, and their time period is within 18th to 19th century. And you know, during their time, during that period of the 18th to 19th century, was when there was the fall in mercantilism. And we consider the classical economics as the first school of thought because they laid the foundation for modern economies. What were they? What were the principles? They focused on free markets. When we talk about free market, we are talking about the invisible hand, the market system. That means that they were the economics who believed in the interaction between the forces of demand and supply. And I'm very sure that we are all aware of what demand and supply means. You know, you had done a little bit of demand and supply in your secondary school, where you looked at the laws of demand and you looked at the law of supply. So they believed in the free market system, and they believe that market equilibrium can be achieved. The YouTube link, it's already there on the, what's it called? And it's already open. It's not sending anybody out. We already have more than 300 students already. So the Zoom link is already open. It's just for them to join. Okay. So like I was saying, they believed in the interaction of demand and supply. Of course, with our knowledge of demand and supply and equilibrium, we know that the equilibrium in the market occurs when there's an intersection between demand and supply. And at that point in time, the price and the quantity, the price that is to be sold, the price at which the goods and services are to be sold, and the quantity that should be sold will be fixed. So they believe that there's an invisible hand that operates in the market. And it's this invisible hand will always ensure that the economy will tend towards equilibrium at every point in time. So if there's a disequilibrium, then the invisible hand will ensure that equilibrium is ascertained via the forces of demand and supply. And as a result of this, they believe that there should be limited government intervention. Limited government intervention. And we have some economists that falls within this group. Now, before I begin to mention some of these economists, I also want us to know that this was during the time of the Industrial Revolution, which led to the rise of capitalism. Of course, capitalism is also a place where the means of production and distribution are basically in the hands of the private sector, the individuals, and there is minimum government intervention. This was an era for the expansion of trade. And like I said, industrial revolution, where the onset of technological progress. So as a result of this, we had many thinkers or many economics that falls within this group. And I'll start with Adam Smith. Now let's go to the chat box. Please tell me, what do you know? What is it you know Adam Smith for? Or what do you know about Adam Smith? I'm waiting for your replies in the chat box. Adam Smith, what do you know about him? He wrote the book Wealth of Nations. Yes, that's very good. Yes, he wrote the book. Yes, he's referred to as the father of classical economics. Yes, yes, yes. So we all know and we are familiar with Adam Smith. I like your answers, and I thank those who have answered those questions. Yes, there's a theory that is known for. Do you know what that theory is called? Yes, he wrote a book. Yes, I'm waiting for that theory. There's a theory Adam Smith is known for. Can you remember? Can you remember? Yes. Latif Abari, thank you. Division of labor. That's where I want us to go. Because he wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations in 1776. And in that book, he wrote about division of labor and specialization. Yes, so division of labor, basically, that's what Adam Smith is known about. That there's a need for people to work, to divide production stages and assign production so that the work can be each person can specialize in an area, and eventually that would increase production. And of course, it's also known for what is called the labor theory of value, and that is that the price of an item determines the value in terms of the amount of labor that has been invested or that has been used in producing it. So the amount of labor that has been used in producing a certain output will determine the value that is assigned, or the price of that commodity. And that's what the labor theory of value is talking about. And so we have Adam Smith. We also have which Adam Smith's its time period is between 1723 to 1790. And then we have David Ricardo. Now I would ask again, what theory do you know that is popular? What theory is popular or was made popular by David Ricardo? Go to the chat box as well and tell me what theory. Comparative cost advantage. Thank you. Yes, thank you. The comparative cost advantage. And of course, we know what that theory is all about. It's talking about international trade. talking about international trade, and it's talking about the fact that countries are to specialize in the production of goods and services that they have comparative advantage. Now we'll move on to the third one, which is Malthus, Thomas Malthus. So which theory is Thomas Malthus known for? Okay, I didn't tell you the years for David Ricardo. That's 1772 to 1823. And so Malthus is known for the population theory. We have the Malthusian population theory. That's very good. He wrote an essay on principle of population in 1798. And we know that he was talking about population, that if population is left unchecked, it will create problems within the economy because population will grow at a geometric progression, geometric rates, and production will go at an arithmetic rate. So if left unchecked, population would overtake production, and then it will lead to economic problems. And then it talked about how those can be, that kind of problem can be resolved. So I think, and then we have Sayes. We have J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill, 1806 to 1873. He wrote a book titled Principles of Political Economy in 1848. And he was talking about social reforms, that there was a need for social reforms in the economy. And you know that he also aligned with the issue of the need for free markets. He aligned with limited government intervention, but he also put in the clause of social reforms so that people would have, how do I put that? He emphasized liberty, freedom. Yes, he emphasized freedom. The 1806 you are talking about, I don't know which 1806 you are talking about. I have not mentioned 1806. So maybe you should be more specific about what you're asking. Okay. Yes, I remember. It's John Stuart Mill, 1806 to 1873. So I've answered that question. So I think we can move on. And then we have, before we move on, let's talk about the final person here, which is Jean Say. Say was the one who, that's what is called the Say's law in economics. Have you heard about that? Have you heard about Say's law in economics? What it says? Do you know what it says? No? No? Okay. There is a law in economics that is referred to as Say's law. And Say's law says supply would always create its own demand. Supply would always create its own demand. That's what it's saying. So what it means here is that whatever it is that has been produced would automatically or would eventually be sold. Because once it's there in the market, people would eventually buy it. So once you produce, that's the way Sayes was thinking, that supply would always create its own demand. So we won't be talking of excess supply, or we won't be talking of stock that is left unsold. Now we've looked at that, and then we can now look at the examples the practical example of the classical economies. And one of such practical examples of the classical economies is the comparative advantage. And you know, it talks about freedom in terms of policies, that are trade-related policies. So it gives opportunity for countries to be able to trade with each other. It allows trading relationships to occur so that it does not really matter if you are best or you're very good in almost all things. And then we have countries that are not too good. with comparative advantage, there's always a basis for free trade. That's an example. Another practical example is that of Malthusian theory as well, the population thing, because we also know that these are things that have happened, that if population is unchecked, it creates chaos. And Nigeria is a good example of that. There's so many economic problems that arises as a result of population growth if left unchecked. So having said that, I'm just going to run through this because everything that is here, I have already said. The core principles of classical economics. Number one, laissez-faire economy. That is an economy where there is minimal government intervention in the economy in terms of production, distribution, marketing, and all the rest. Invisible hand, I've also talked about that they believe that there's an invisible hand because it's a free market and the forces of supply and demand are the ones that interact to determine price and quantity, So there's an invisible hand. Then we have the value theory. I've talked about that, the labor theory of value. And I told you that says that the value of a commodity is determined by labor. That is the number of labor hours that had been invested in the production of that commodity determines the value of that commodity. Now, in terms of distribution, the focus here is on wages, on profits, and rent as outcomes of production. And we know that these are the factors of production anyway. So the focus is on how much labor will earn vis-a-vis the profits that are to be made by those who have invested in production, that is the entrepreneurs, and of course, rent, which is very important in terms of the place, or the place that production takes place. Then growth and accumulation. According to the classics, the driver of economic progress is capital accumulation. According to them, without capital, there cannot be business. Businesses cannot thrive. So the engine for thriving businesses and for success in businesses is just capital. So there's a need to continue to accumulate capital. That is to invest, to add more to investment, to generate new investment, so that you will continue to make more profit. And as you continue to make more profit, it translates into economic growth. That is the ideology. And of course, we've also talked about international trade, so that it is not only one country that grows, but the world, all countries globally, because they will have been able to take the advantage of trading with each other. And so you find out that every nation also will progress and aspire. And these are the core principles of the classical economics. Now we have criticisms that has been levied against this school. Now you see what happens is that there's a progression. Once there's a school of thought, some school of thought will come in and criticize. And on the basis of these criticisms, another school of thought will evolve as a means of economic progress, as a means of solving economic challenges, as a means of moving forward. So they would use the criticisms, they would assess, they would analyze, come up with criticisms, and after they have done that, they will come up with another ideology, another thinking, another means of solving these criticisms, and that will lead us to another school of thought. So what are the criticisms levied against the classics? The first one is that there is an overemphasis on self-regulating markets. They are too sure that the economy will always tend back to equilibrium. Even when there is disequilibrium, it will go back to equilibrium. They were too sure of that. But they have forgotten that there could be market failure. And eventually there was a market failure. There was an era in the 1930s where there was the Great Depression because the level of unemployment was very high, the level of inflation became very high, and the economy did not turn back to equilibrium. It did not resolve that issue. So they ignored that there could be market failures, and that sometimes the market might not be able to regulate itself. And like I said, it actually happened. Then the labor theory of value was also criticized. Like I told you, that when they criticize, it leads to another school of thought. And so the neoclassics, which is the second school of thought that we're going to talk about, talked about the fact that the issue or the discourse should be on marginal utility, marginal unit of production, marginal cost, marginal revenue, and not really the number of hours that have been spent in producing an amount of commodity. Okay, so when we get to classical economics, we'll explain the marginal revolution, what it's all about. And then it neglected issues of inequality and social justice. Because like I told you, it favored capitalism. And capitalism maintains the survival of the fittest. These capitalists are only interested in making profit. And so the level of income inequality in such economy was sometimes high, because like I said, survival of the fittest, and it encourages the rich to get richer, at every point in time, exploitation of the consumer, sometimes injustice, in terms of they can hire and fire at any point in time. And then the Malthusian population theory also was being criticized as being pessimistic. Because why are we saying that? Because the population theory was myopic. Malthus at that point in time was not forward thinking. He did not realize the fact that there could be technological progress, because his treatise was based on the fact that agricultural production would always go at an arithmetic rate, and that's why he was so sure that population would always be more than would always grow more than agricultural production. He never thought about the fact that there could be technological progress. He never talked about the place of technology where there could be revolution in production, and we could have mass production of commodities that could move along or as population is increasing. So these are the criticisms that have been levied against the classical economists. And so as a result of that, another group emerged. And this other group is known as the neoclassical economists. The neoclassical economists, that's the second group that emerged. And they essentially came to reshape classical ideas. And they were the foundation of what we now know as microeconomics. With them, they came up with the use of mathematics, calculus, and algebra in explaining economic behavior. They were also the ones that talked about diminishing marginal returns. These are the group of economics that we're going to talk about. They emerged in the late 19th century, around 1870s. And like I'd already said, they came up because they were the ones who criticized the classical economists, especially the labor theory of value. And so they came up with their own ideology. And their own ideology focused more, on individual decision making You know, the classics focused on production and distribution, the labor theory of value, how you will use your labor to produce, capitalism, how it will basically be in the hands of the private sector. And you know what, they were supply creating its own demand. So their focus was basically on production and distribution. But for the neoclassic economics, they shifted the focus to individual decision making. And that's why we talk about utility, you know. And I'm very sure, what is utility? Let me ask you that. What is utility? That's why we talk about utility and we talk about marginal analysis. Of course, you know, we can't talk about utility without talking about marginal utility. That's an example of what we're trying to say, that they brought in the concept, the marginal concept. I'm still waiting for the answer. What is utility? The marginal concept. Utility means satisfaction, yes. Utility is the power of satisfaction. Yes, that is satisfaction that is derived from the consumption of a commodity. Yes, that is utility. So you can see that utility is more individual focused. So the thing is that as an individual, you try as much as possible to maximize your utility. So they shifted the focus from production and distribution to the individual. Okay. And so we also look at the marginal analysis. You know, I told you the other time that they were the one who introduced calculus and algebra, you know, into economics. And they were the ones who did all this so that now as economics, we cannot be economists without having a fair knowledge of calculus and algebra, the courses in economics that are just basically calculus and algebra, because we would need to calculate, you know, calculate utility, you know, use time series, use data, you know, to calculate demand, calculate supply, level of equilibrium, and on and on like that. So their time period is late 19th century to early 28th century. Their time period is late 19th century to early 28th century. And we have group of economics that fall under this group. We have Williams, well, we have Williams, Stephen Gibbons, Williams Stephen Gibbons, 1835 to 1882. 1835 to 1882, and introduced the marginal utility concept. And the marginal utility concept is basically talking about that, the fact that value assigned to a product is not based on the number of labor hours like the classics believed, but it's based on utility, the satisfaction that can be derived from the commodity. So that the value of a commodity is determined by the satisfaction that you derive, not from the number of hours that have been invested in it. And that's its own contribution. Then we also have Leon Walras. Leon Walras developed what is called general equilibrium theory. Now that's an highly mathematical concept in economics. You are still in 100 level. When you move higher in economics, you would understand the general equilibrium theory better. It's a complex. It's made up of a number of equations, you know, that needs to be solved mathematically. Then we look at Alfred Marshall. Okay. Leon Walras is between 1834 and 1910. 1834 and 1910. Then we have Alfred Marshall. Alfred Marshall is the one who introduced the supply and demand curves and the elasticity of demand and supply. I'm very sure you know about that, and that's going to be our next topic anyway. So we'll be able to discuss more on that. Now, let's take a practical example of the neoclassic school. Of course, we know about consumer demand. And then we look at marginal utility, which is the extra satisfaction that you derive from consuming one more unit. Extra satisfaction that you derive from consuming one more unit of a product. And so you can see the demand for smartphones. People will buy smartphones that are working perfectly, but another one will come up and then they will see something unique, something they desire that will satisfy, that will give satisfaction. And because of that, they want to buy that as well. Buy one more unit, buy an extra one, buy another, you know, because, and why are they buying? You tend to wonder, why are people changing phones? Why are they buying? It's because they are deriving extra satisfaction more than what they had derived from the initial one. There's an extra satisfaction to it. And so they don't mind parting with more money to be able to get that extra satisfaction. And that's why we'll say that the value of a commodity is determined by the utility, that is the satisfaction that is derived from it. So it's applicable. Their thinkings and their thoughts and ideology are applicable. So I'll run through this again because all that is there, I have said. The core principles of neoclassical economics. One is that the focus is on marginal utility. The value is derived from the extra satisfaction from consuming one more unit. They talk about rational choice because they believe that individuals are rational human beings and their focus is to maximize utility, their power of satisfaction, just as the focus of the farm is also to maximize profit. And so if they want to maximize profit, they must produce goods and services that will produce utility. And because they are neoclassics, there is also a part of classical school of thought in them. And that is, they also believe that markets will always tend towards equilibrium, and that the market will achieve equilibrium whenever supply equals demand. And like I've said earlier on, there's an heavy use of calculus and algebra, and they talked about diminishing returns. I'm sure that you already know what diminishing returns means. It means that the more you consume of a commodity, as you consume a commodity, it tends to increase your level of satisfaction, but at a point in time, you find that the more you consume, the less the satisfaction that you derive. That's what is called diminishing returns. They also believe in that you cannot ultimately continue to consume a particular commodity forever. At a point in time, diminishing returns would set in. And I've said that the last one, subjective value, the value depends on individual preferences and not on the value of labor. So now let's look at the criticisms that have been levied against the school of thoughts. One is that they assume perfect rationality and perfect competition, which rarely exists. That's also an offshoot from the classical school. They believe that human beings are always very rational. But of course, we know that not all human beings are rational. What you would feel if you say somebody should make a choice between two items and you assume that it's going to make the first choice and eventually ends up making the second choice. People can do that. They're not, it's not all human beings that behave rationally, but they assume that all human beings would behave rationally. They ignore social, cultural, and institutional factors. Here, they're not even talking about governments. They're not talking about government control. They're not thinking that it would exist. They're not looking at culture, that there are some goods and services that culture or tradition dictates that one should not consume, or that might not be that might not bring in profit. They're not looking at that. And we know that these are things that can affect your choice. Then overemphasis on equilibrium, may neglect dynamics of innovation and crisis. So, there's still, like I told you, there's an element of classical economists in them, and they did not think about the advantages of innovation, that there could be better ways of doing things, technology, and then also the fact that there could be crisis, there could be disequilibrium that might not turn back to equilibrium, there could be crisis. Like I told you, there was a crisis in the 1930s. My screen is showing Naomi, there's a network problem from your end. So critics like Keynes argued it, critics argued it underestimated uncertainty and instability in real economics. Just like I said, they underestimated the fact that there could be chaos, that there could be economic problems. They thought they had seen it all. But of course, because the world is forever evolving and changing, changes occurred that their theories and their ideologies could not resolve, and this led to Keynes. Although we're not talking about Keynes there, we're not putting in Keynes as part of what we have here, but there's a need for us to look at Keynes. We have who is called the Lord Maynard Keynes. And for Lord Maynard Keynes, he was talking about the fact that he came up also to critique the classics, the neoclassics, to say that there's a need for government intervention. All along, the classics and the neoclassics were talking about limited government intervention. According to Keynes, there is a need for government intervention because eventually, when everything went the other way, the Great Depression in the 1930s, government had to step in to resolve the economic challenges of that time. And that was Keynes' argument, that there's a need for government intervention. Okay. So now let's move on to the third school of thought, which is Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism. Now, the time period for this is between the 18th and the 19th century. 18th to 19th century. And this theory, or the school of thought, came into being by a person known as Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham. He was the one who started this school of thought. But this school of thought was made popular by John Stuart Mill. It was made popular by John Stuart Mill. And what informed the ideology? Why do we go? Of course, you know that Unitarianism is derived from the word utility. And utility, I told you that it's a progression. Those ones were talking about marginal utility, they were talking about utility, they were talking about, yes, and this is also an extension because they criticized what those ones the neoclassics did, and then they expanded on it. So the utilitarianism is also derived from the word utility, and we know that utility is the power of satisfaction. So what they are interested in is the satisfaction, but they refer to satisfaction as pleasure. Pleasure, So the emphasis is on pleasure and not on quantity. When we're talking about utility in the neoclassic school, we're talking about the fact that the number of commodities that a person would consume is dependent on the power of satisfaction that it derives. Now, here they are looking at the quality, the quality of pleasure now, not quantity. They are emphasizing on quality of pleasure. And according to them, you derive greater pleasure, commodities that you would derive greater pleasure from. So according to them, you will be making a right choice, in choosing a basket of goods and services if that basket will promote happiness. And to them, what is happiness? Happiness is pleasure plus absence of pain. That is how John Stuart Mill defined happiness. Pleasure plus absence of pain. So what was he looking at? He was saying that there is what is called lower pleasure. I think I'm explaining too much because I'm still going to go back and explain. Okay, so let me just say this. There's what is called lower pleasure and there's what is called higher pleasure. And so consumers would always aim at higher pleasure because it will give them the greatest happiness. So we have an example of that in modern times, which is when government make policies, banning harmful drugs to maximize social happiness. Because here, the function of government is to maximize welfare. Government takes care of the happiness of the majority rather than individual happiness. And you know that the use of harmful drugs is an individual happiness and not doesn't promote social happiness, because drug addicts are a menace in the society, and as a result of that, when you find government banning harmful drugs, is to ensure that the society becomes a happier environment to live in. So this is also applicable in modern times. So now let's look at the core idea of utilitarianism. So like I said, they still stand upon the principle of utility, but here they're interested in the power of satisfaction, that will promote happiness. May I ask? Okay, I've even defined happiness, so let me know ask again. Happiness is pleasure, and they have defined what happiness is. Happiness is pleasure plus absence of pain. Even at that, let me ask, how would you define happiness? If you are happy, what does it entail? Let's go to the chat box. I think I still want to hear your own definition of happiness. Okay, you'll be joyful. Okay, temporary joy. A state of euphoria, a state of well-being, when your heart is full of joy, when you are satisfied with something, when you're not sad, absence of sorrow, freedom. I won't take the freedom. I won't take that. When you're happy, yes. State of well-being, when you are being satisfied, that's good. When you're feeling good, yes. Yes, so pleasant joy, yes. So you all know what happiness is. Thank you. Thank you. So when you derive pleasure from consuming an item or a service, that is what happiness is. When it brings you joy and does not bring you pain. Okay. Jeremy Bentham, like I said, was the founder of classical utilitarianism, but it was John Stuart Mill who popularized the concept. And like I was saying, he was talking about higher pleasure. You know, Mill insisted that higher pleasure are superior. Okay, so let me try and define what lower pleasure means and what higher pleasure means so that we'll be able to understand what higher pleasure is. Okay, somebody was saying is happiness not different from joy? Happiness is a subset of joy. So it depends on who is defining. If you are going into the very nitty-gritty of it, you could make a demarcation between what is happiness and what is joy. Some people will say that happiness is just temporary joy. So it's still a subset of it. But in the layman definition of it, many would agree that happiness is also joy. So I've answered that question. So let's look at lower pleasure. Now, it says there is what is called lower pleasure. And that lower pleasure is when you are just satisfying your body, when it's just giving you your flesh, when you are satisfying your body, your flesh, or when you are happy because you have consumed something physically. I think that's good. When you're happy because you have consumed something physically. And so examples of such lower pleasure will be when you eat something that gives you pleasure, that you like, your best food, for example, when you drink something that's sweet in your mouth, down your throat, and you derive satisfaction, pleasure from it, and you derive comfort from it. That's the physical. Maybe you buy a bed, a good bed. You had a bad bed, that was giving you body aches, and then you buy a good bed, a better one. And then when you sleep on it, you derive comfort and you derive pleasure from it, and that is what is called lower pleasures. Then we have what he defined as higher pleasure. And higher pleasure is one that has to do with the use of your rational and moral facilities, faculties. Rational and moral. That means you're making that gives that makes use of your intellect, that shows you have something upstairs. That means your brain is functioning very well. Something that has that is moral, that is aesthetic. For example, like reading. Reading is an intellectual thing where you read and you understand and you derive pleasure from acquiring knowledge, from knowing better, for receiving information. That is higher pleasure. When you what's it called? When you have friends that you talk with, intellectual engagements that you discuss with, that you're always craving their you're craving that they would always be near you so that you can discuss, you can gist, you can talk, and it gives you pleasure, from engaging with them. Arts, ART, people look at artistic works, and they derive pleasure. Creative acts, for example, when you content writing, when you watch some skits, and then it's an intellectual thing, the ability to be able to understand and derive pleasure. So it's saying that those are what is referred to as higher pleasures. And according to him, that consumers should be interested, they should be interested in attaining higher pleasure, because that is what gives true happiness, and not just lower pleasure, which is just to satisfy the flesh, eating, drinking, comfort. So they emphasized the higher pleasure thing because to them it's more superior. So let's look at criticisms of the Utilitarianists. What are the criticisms? Okay. I left out something there. You know, they also believe that happiness promotes freedom. You know, that happiness will promote freedom because it's grounded in fairness. You know, your freedom, your ability to be able to consume that which will give you happiness. I needed to mention that. So let's look at criticisms. Measuring pleasure. Now, one of the criticisms leveled against them is that it is very difficult to compare pleasure. That how do you objectively measure what gives you higher pleasure and what gives you lower pleasure? Pleasure. How do you begin to measure and say this is the pleasure the happiness you derive from this is higher than the happiness you derive from this? That it creates a problem of measurement. Even when you do get to measure how objective is um, the pleasure. More than the brain, I'm answering a question, more than the brain, it's more of the intellectual activity that takes place. You know, the ability to be able to engage your intellectual ability, you know, gives you, it's just like when you go for an exam and then you pass the exam, you come out and you're able to answer the questions, you know, it gives you pleasure, it gives you satisfaction because that automatically means, or you have something that you think you would not understand, and you sit down and you begin to research about it, and eventually you get the answer or you get to understand it. There's a pleasure that you derive. You even tell yourself that, yes, you even tell yourself that, yes, it's good. Yes, I'm brilliant. You tell yourself that. There's a pleasure that you get from that. I'm brilliant. Eh? So I can decode this, you know. And then maybe some people are talking in codes. And then you are able to decipher the codes and you know, you get this intellectual happiness from it, pleasure from it. So I've answered that question. So we are looking at another one is minority rights. The argument is that the Unitarianists risk sacrificing human rights for majority happiness. You know, I explained that the other time, that they're more interested in, I gave you the example I was giving you, social happiness, happiness for majority rather than for minority. And so when you look at happiness for majority, you might indirectly also be stepping on the rights of individuals who might not be deriving pleasure from something, even though others, the greater majority, are depriving pleasure from it. You know, let me give you an example of that. It's like somebody, like during this December, for example, in some of the streets in Lagos State, you find groups of people coming together in the community and saying they're having a Christmas party. And then they do all night where they celebrate and infringe on people's rights. Some people don't get to sleep. Are you with me? They don't get to sleep. And maybe they even they're taking drugs and they needed to sleep. But they won't be able to do that because of the noise coming from the party people in the community. And yet, you know, it gives them greater happiness. The greater majority, the greater number of people in the society are there, and they're enjoying themselves and they're deriving happiness from eating and drinking, the lower pleasure thing. But yeah, there's somebody here who does not align with what they're doing. So that's what they're saying, that sacrificing individual rights for majority happiness. And then it's complex as well. Is complex because the complexity there, it's all about the measurement. What's so special about so you begin to ask yourself, is this lower pleasure? Is this higher pleasure? Does it give higher satisfaction or does it give lower satisfaction? Satisfaction is satisfaction. Why make it complex, that it has to be intellectual, it has to be this, it has to be that. So they feel that squat actually brought in more complexity than the easy way in which better had done it, just talking about pleasure. So these are the criticisms against the Unitarianists. So we move on to the final one, which is welfare economics. Of course, hearing the word welfare already connotes that we'll be talking about government. Connotes that we'll be talking about government, because here we are looking at welfare, taking care of the majority. And that's also a criticism from those who were talking about utility, because the utility thing in most cases, when we start with the classic, the utility thing is an individual thing, and then John Squadmin brought the individual and then introduced the social thing, the social concept of utility to it. And the welfare economists are just basically looking at social welfare. And so the welfare economics studies is all about how we can use economic policy to effectively allocate the available resources in such a way that it will promote social welfare, in such a way that it will promote social welfare. That is their focus. That's why we call them welfare economics. They're interested in the promotion of social welfare. And like I said, this involves government. And that is why we are using policy, economic policies, to achieve social welfare. This group emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So you can see that they're not too far from us. So these are the recent form of economists. They're the recent form of economists. And their focus is on fairness, efficiency, and social justice. Of course, that's what will be expected, because like I said, it's more of economic policies that are made by government. So the focus on fairness, that is taking care of the majority, ensuring justice, that people have freedom to choose what they desire, to choose what to buy, to choose what to consume, to engage in productive activities, and then efficiency, to ensure that resources are efficiently allocated within the society, so that people are not marginalized and people are not exploited. That's the focus, and that's why we call them the welfare economics. Okay. Should I take the thinkers first? Okay, let's. Okay, let's look at them. In looking at them, we'll be able to come up with what their principles are. But then let's talk about the fact that the core here, the core focus in economics, that has to do with welfare economics, development economics, environmental economics, and public sector economics or public policy. So these are the core areas in economics, areas of specialization that is tied to, that aligns with welfare economics, development economics, public policy, and then environmental economics. So let's look at the various economics that fall under this group. I'm looking at who to Who to start with? Okay. Let me start with Pareto. Wilfredo Pareto. Have you heard about Pareto optimality? I think you should have. I'm waiting for your answers. Have you heard about Pareto optimality? No. Economists in the house. The real economy students, have you heard about Pareto optimality? You should have. Okay. Anyway, you eventually get to know that. But on the periphery, let me just tell you what Pareto optimality is about. You know, Pareto optimality is talking about the fact that resources should be allocated efficiently, and that the way to allocate resources efficiently is if no one can be made better off. If no one can be made better off without making someone else worse off. What am I saying here? You attain a point of Pareto optimality if somebody is better off, but not at the expense of somebody being worse off, then that means Pareto optimality has been achieved. So that means that resources have been efficiently allocated. That means at least one person is better off, and you ensure that somebody else is not worse off. And that's the point of Pareto optimality. Now we look at another person, which is Otto Pico. Okay, let me go back. Pareto is between 1848 and 1923. Pareto is between 1848 to 1923. So let's go to Otto Pico. Otto Pico talks about externalities. That's its core research. Externalities. And so when we talk about externalities, we mean the cost and the benefit that are offshoots of production, but they are not reflected in market prices. You know that when you set a market price, you add costs before setting your market price. But we say that there are what are called externalities. That means there are other costs and benefits that are not factored into the price of the commodity, but they exist. And they came up with the fact that these things are called externalities, but they must be factored. They must be accounted for in one way or the other. And that is what what's it called? Pigo argued about. That's the point of let me give you an example of externalities. Externalities could be, you know, we're talking of cost and benefit. So it could be negative, it could be positive. For example, if we take negative, you know, we said that the part of what we do is the part of the areas of socialization is environmental economics. So what we're saying is that if a company sets up, if somebody sets up a company, an industry, a manufacturing industry in an environment, and then pollutes the environment, maybe via industrial waste that passes through the gutters, and then it has a negative influence on the people living in that area in terms of affecting their health, you know, when they inhale, or when mosquitoes perch on it and get into their house and spread diseases in one way or the other. What we are saying is that that is an externality because it's actually not factored into the costs of production. You know, the company will not factor that into its cost of production at all. But it's actually, you know, negatively affecting the environment. So that's the point that the externalities, the costs and benefits that exist, but are not factored into the market price. Let me give you an example of a positive externality. Now, for example, if you get to an area and that area already has a transformer, it has a good ready water supply, you're going to go into that environment and you begin to use these facilities. Maybe before you got there, some people had formed together to buy the transformer. So you just get there and you begin to use the transformer. Of course, the only thing you're going to factor into your cost is just the cost of electricity. You're not going to think of the cost of the transformer. No, but it was actually provided by some people. But it's not going to be factored into the price as your cost, factored as part of the price at which you will sell your commodity. So that's all about. You get to learn better. I'm just giving you a general introduction of what you're going to learn in economics. So let's move on. Let's look at the third person. Who is the third person here? Abalena. Yes, Abalena. Abalena, 1903 to 1982. 1903 to 1982. Abalena advocated government intervention, as a means to correct market failures. We've argued that over and over again that the market failure can occur, and that even with invisible hand and everything, there can still be market failure. And Abba was able to argue that there should be government intervention, just like King did at the other time. And so he introduced the concept of what is called functional finance, the need for government to come in. And the area there is public policy for government intervention in the financial affairs of the country. Now we're going to look at the last person, which is Amartya Sen. Amartya Sen, 1933 to 2023. You can see that the welfare economics are a recent set of economics. Amartya Sen, 1933 to 2023. Amartya Sen expanded welfare economics by adding what is called the capability approach. Capabilities approach. Now, capability approach is talking about well-being. Of course, this is social welfare anyway. So we'll talk about well-being. But to say well-being depends on freedom and opportunities. All along, when we'll be talking about well-being, when we talk about well-being, we're basically being concerned about income. So we say that if somebody is in a state of well-being, then that means that the person earns high income to be able to take care of him or herself, to be able to get access to the basic necessities of life. So we assume that is well-being, or that is the parameter for well-being. But according to Amartya Sen, money, income, is not only what determines well-being. In addition, there should be freedom and opportunities, so that your ability to be free, freedom in terms of making choice, quality choices, that you desire, not that you're forced. Freedom, for example, let me explain what I'm saying. You are hungry. You are hungry. And then you eat. You eat, you eat food. That is well-being based on income. You just go and you buy, you buy food. But he is saying that you must go beyond just going to buy food. It should be, can I buy food that will nourish me? An example of that is that we all know that when you want to eat, you should eat balanced diet. Take food, make sure it's balanced in terms of fruits and vegetables. But then you cannot, you eat the food without fruits, you eat without vegetables, you eat food just to fill your body. then that means that there's still no freedom. That's the essence of it. You must have the freedom to be able to buy all, to buy a balanced diet. So we're looking at the value, you know, the value, excuse me, what people can actually do with their resources. So what we are saying here is that we are shifting focus from just looking at income and resources. Yes, income has to be there. You must be able to get income to be able to buy these things. Yes, these resources must be, thank you. These resources must be available for you to make use of them. But we are saying you should go further. So what you can actually, how you can maximize the resources so that you can get the best out of the available resources. So that's why we're looking at social welfare. It is not enough that the resources are available in an economy. But what is it that we can actually do with the resources? Because the resources being there becomes idle unless it is tapped and effectively used for enhancing the social welfare of the people. That's what we're saying. So it's not enough that the resources are there. It's not enough that people are earning, minimum wage is 70,000. What can people do with the 70,000? How much food can 70,000 naira buy? Would it buy balanced diet? So what can we do with the money and the resources? That's what really matters. And not really that the income and the resources. That's what the capabilities there is. What is the resources and income capable of delivering, of giving to the citizens? And that's what Amata Sen is talking about. So Amata Sen focuses on human development. That is development economics. So having said that, okay, we have an example here of the piggy tax, which is pollution to correct externalities. You know, I talked to you about externalities, and I talked about negative externalities, and I talked about pollution and industry polluting the environment. And so these are things that are not factored into price, but they need to be accounted for, like I said. So a means of accounting for that is to tax, put a tax on pollution, so that everybody that pollutes gets to pay tax. Pay tax. So that means that government can then take up the responsibility of reducing or alleviating such pollution. So that means they pay for it. That tends to want to correct for the negative externalities. So that's an example in the modern world. So let's look at the core principles of welfare economics. Core principles of welfare economics. Efficiency versus equity. Now, because we have talked about the fact that in welfare economics, they look at means where they can make optimal use of the resources that are available. And while they're doing that they want to make efficient use of this, they also must be aware of the fact, because it's a social thing, they must also, it's all about social welfare. They must also be aware of equity, fairness in distribution, so that people are not exploited or discriminated about. So welfare economics is it's all about taking care of the majority of the people. And I've already talked about Pareto optimality, where you can make some people better off without making others worse off, without harming others. I've also talked about externalities, pollution and education spillovers. And so it requires government intervention. When these externalities arises, government intervention would be there to correct for these externalities, like the payment of tax by companies who pollute the environment. Then we have the social choice theory, which looks at how individual preferences can be aggregated into collective decisions. You know, it's all about social welfare. And so here we're looking at for the majority. So we would also factor in, because anyway, majority is a sum up, it's an addition of choices, of individual preferences. So the essence of welfare economics is to make sure that as many as possible, as many people as possible, their choices are accounted for. You know, their preferences are taken into account. And I've also talked about the capabilities theory by Amartya Sen, which focuses on human development, which talks about freedom and opportunities, which is beyond GDP. GDP is just sustained increase in national income, and its focus is just on income. So beyond that, let's look at how we can focus our government policy can focus on human development, development of human being through training and education. You know, freedom. You know, the freedom to choose, freedom to do business, and opportunities that can be generated from all this. So that's about welfare economics. Let's look at the core principles. Let's look at criticisms. Now, criticisms. Measuring welfare is complex and subjective. Yes, it's highly subjective because we're looking at an aggregation of preferences of so many people together at the same point in time. So it's actually very subjective, and it is complex to add up preferences and then be able to arrive at the decision and say that this is what is good for the majority of the people. Also for Pareto efficiency, you know, which says that how Pareto efficiency talks about the fact that you can make some better work without making some people worse off. You see, and the essence of this is that when you talk about some Pareto optimality, you know, there is no place for inequality. It's not looking at the rich versus the poor. It's not looking at discrimination. It's not looking at distribution of income. And so you find that if your focus is just that you can make some people better off without making some people worse off, then you find out that even in countries with extreme inequality, where the gap between the rich and the poor is very, very high, there can still be Pareto optimality. So it's still yet to solve a major economic problem. That's the essence. It's still yet to solve a major economic problem because ordinarily we are looking at social welfare, and that should tend towards reducing the gap between the rich and the poor. That is reducing the level of inequality. And then I didn't talk about AWO, so I'm going to leave that out. The AWO theorem. AWO is also part of them. And then we look at welfare economics often assumes rationality and complete information, which might not be possible in practical terms. So practically, when you look at the welfare economics with what it says, with what it does, with all it's all about, public policy, making decisions that will take care of the majority as against individual preferences, you know, for you to be able to do that, you need information, you need data, and which might not be readily available. For example, in Nigeria, policies are being made on data that has not been, how do I put it, that has not been, I can't think of the word, that has not been judiciously collected. And so when you make policies based on false data or inaccurate data, that's the better word. When you make policies based on inaccurate data, then that means that you are definitely, when you make policies based on inaccurate data, that means that those policies will definitely not solve the economic problems that you are targeting because you do not have the complete information. And like every other theory in economics, I hope you know this is a common thing. Economics assume, the assumption is that individuals are rational human beings. And that would always be a clause in all the theories that we talk about in economics, because the assumption is that human beings are rational beings. But we know that that does not always occur in reality. In reality, not all human beings are rational beings. When we'll be looking at demand, we'll see that. And I know you already know what demand is. It's all about. You know, the law of demand that says that when prices are. Let me ask, what does the law of demand say? What does the law of demand say? And then let me answer the question of the person who is asking, how do you take attendance? You take attendance by writing your name and your program and your matric number. It will be recorded on the Zoom link, on the Zoom platform. So the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. Yes, that's the law of demand. The higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. But of course, we know that that's assuming that human beings will behave rationally. But we know that sometimes higher prices can also lead to higher quantity demanded. So human beings can behave irrationally. So that's what it's saying here, that welfare economics assumes a lot, which might not be rational. Okay, so those are the criticisms. So let's try to do a comparison in one form or the other. We look at the classics, who are the foundation of modern economics. The neoclassics they formed the basis for microeconomics. I hope you know that this course is microeconomics. That's what we're dealing with. This course is microeconomics. And then we look at the Utilitarianisms, which laid the foundation for policy making in government. And then the welfare economics, who shaped public policy development and environmental economics. So this comparison and legacy of each of them. We want to do another sort of comparison. For the classical economics, they believed on free markets and the labor theory of value. The neoclassics, they talked about marginal utility and equilibrium. The utilitarianism talked about greatest happiness and talked about the fact that there are higher pleasures and lower pleasures. And we have the welfare economists who discussed Pareto efficiency, externalities, and social justice. Now, if you go to this table, this is a comprehensive table of all that we have talked about. And you can, and then when I send this to you, you can go through it. And it's just talking about everything compressed in this table. I have done what you should have gone to do. So I don't know how you're going to compensate me for helping you to do this. Don't know how you're going to compensate me for helping you to do this. Oh, thank you. I'm reading your comments. Yes, I'm reading your comments. That's good. That's good. Thank you as well for staying calm throughout the class. I'm not disrupting my class. I thank you too for that. What am I showing again? I'm going to send the slides to you. I love you too. Yes, I do. Okay, so I think I can take just one or two questions. The chat box. Yes, I have the course outline. Has it not been given to you? Okay, don't worry. I'll send the course outline through the economics governor. Tell her, let her remind me. Let her remind me out. I did the the course outline acts the recommended text. It does. But anyway, like I'd always tell students, this is microeconomics. You know, this is A-levels economics that we're teaching you. So if you can just get any economic textbooks that you would understand what they're saying, and you will see all we're going to teach in there. It might not really be the recommended text. You know, just get Nigerian authors that have written and that you can understand what has been written. So that you can understand what has been written. I guess that's enough. Thank you. Thank you. I'm reading your comments. In our next class, we're going to start with demand and supply. And I know that some people are asking questions, and it's let me go back to the chat, but let me see if I can trace those questions. No, they are not together. Somebody says the utilitarianism and classical economics can be seen as together. They're not together. They're talking about different things. The classical economics was talking about labor. The focus was on labor, on production, you know, talking about the theory of the value, the theory value of labor. And the classical school, we're talking about the Utilitarianism, we're talking about utility, the power of satisfaction. So they're not the same. The subjecting aspect of welfare economics, does it mean that you have to tend your property? Tend your properties. I don't understand what tend your properties means. All of them, and the question, between the school of thought, which of them is the most preferable and conforms to economic realities? All of them conforms to economic realities. There's a space in economics for all of them. You know, when you look at economics is very broad. And what is obtainable in one country might not be obtainable in another country. So it depends on the economic problems that you are trying to solve. All of them are attainable. And that's why I gave you examples. And all the examples I gave you were modern examples for each one of them. I gave you examples. So they are all realistic. They are all economic realities. All of them. All of them. It's just that there's nothing that can be perfect. And that's why we keep learning, because there's really nothing that you can see that is actually perfect. So you see the idea behind, I'm trying to answer the questions together. The idea behind all this classical school of thought, it's just the same thing. You are in class, as you are in my class now. If I give you a project to write on the same topic, all of you will come, some of you will come with different perspective of the same thing. And that's what they are. Each person is, I told you, it's an ideology. They are their thoughts, that they are thinking, and they have written it down. And anybody at any point in time can pick it up. It's just like when government make policies. When government wants to make policy, they feel that that's the best policy that can be made. But once they make the policy, somebody picks it up and sees a hole in it and says, no, this policy is not right. It should have been like this. It should have been like this. And somebody comes up and does a better job or a worse job. And if majority, or if people also follow suit and continues on that, and then that becomes popular, and everybody talks about it and quotes it and refers to it, and that's what all this school of thought it's all about. No. This is a question. Mark, can welfare economics thrive in a capitalist system? No. No and no. Capitalist system, the driver there is the private sector. That is the private sector that drives the economy. Government participation is kept at the minimum. So welfare economics cannot thrive in a capitalist state. Not at all. I didn't recommend any textbook. I told you that there are many Nigerian textbooks that you can pick up once you read and you can understand. What we are doing here is just A-levels economics. And there's so many textbooks that can do that. All you need is find a textbook that aligns with the course outline once I give it to you. And then I'm not recommending any, but the recommended textbooks are in the course outline. When you receive the course outline, you will see the recommended textbooks. Okay, so I think we can stop here today, and then by next week, Friday, God willing, we will get to meet again. Thank you all very much for taking the time out, and I really enjoyed you for staying calm and using the chat box. Yes, it's been stressless taking this class. So have a lovely weekend and see you next week. God bless you.